Should we start? Should we wait for 05? I think we should start. Let's go. All right, so good morning, everyone, at least for us here in LA. My name is Mercedes Fajes Agudo, and in my name and in the name of all the conference organizing committee, we would like to welcome everyone to the second already, annual International Gender Inclusive Language Instruction Conference. We are honored to host today a diverse array of speakers from institutions from around the world, representing a rich tapestry of linguistic and cultural perspectives. I would like to mention that this conference would not have been possible without the generous support of several USC organizations. So therefore, please let me take a minute to thank the Center for Language and Cultures, the Levin Institute for Humanities, the Department for Gender and Sexuality Studies, the Department of East Asian Languages and Cultures, the Department of Latin American and Iberian Cultures, the Department of French and Italian, as well as the Equity Research Institute. As we embark on this journey together today, there are a couple of technical points for today's conference that I would like to address. We will all together in this main room for session 1 and 2. And later in the afternoon at 1:30 for the third part of the conference, you will have the flexibility to choose your desired panel from the main room. So please join us at 1:30 in this main room, and then you can go to your breakout room with your desired session. So without further ado, we extend our warmest welcome to each and every one of you. Thank you for being here, and we really hope you enjoyed this session. And then I would like to give you time to present Wes.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you all are. My name is Ben Papadopoulos. I'm one of the other organizers of this conference, and it's a pleasure to have you all. Thank you for joining us from all over the world. I see lots of United States, Sweden, Italy. I happen to be in Greece. We have Iran represented, Toulouse, France. It's a pleasure to have all of you here. So now I just kind of want to go over a few things to get us situated into the conference today. So our support here is going to help show you all some parts of our schedule. And just so you all are reminded, almost all sessions will be recorded. So if you would like, go ahead, shut your camera off if you would not like to end up in that recording, or please show your beautiful face and be one of the ones that stays. And hopefully you will have access to all of these recordings after the talk, very shortly after. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at some parts of the schedule. So we have 3 sessions planned for you today and 2 keynotes, which we are super, super excited about. The first is the wonderful Wes Chernin. The second is Kiki Kosnick. And this is session 1. This is what it will look like, not a rotating session. This one is 3 papers. We have to announce that the first presenter unfortunately lost her voice and cannot speak for us. We are hoping that the other 3 presenters in the group are comfortable with moving up 15 minutes. If you are not comfortable with that, DM us and we will rectify the issue. So those 3 papers are going to be the 3 that follow Eleanor's right there. And then with the time that we have remaining, we'll have either more time for questions or we will take a longer break. And then after the break, we move on to session 2, which you will see here in just a second. This is 4 papers, also not rotating. And there we go. And then we break out into breakout rooms. So the third session, we'd like to go there, is going to have 3 rooms. These are somewhat language-specific rooms. We have one panel that's Spanish and Catalan only. We have a second panel that's Portuguese, Italian, and English. And we have a third panel that's Hebrew and Chinese. We would like to note that actually very many languages are represented at our conference, much more than the program would betray, just on how we organized everything. And in fact, if you have not had a chance to check out the program with the abstracts, with all the other information, please go ahead and take a look at the link that I've just sent you here. And that's about it, Mercedes, right? Ready to move on?
Yes, let's go.
Okay. I have the absolute pleasure of introducing our first keynote speaker, someone who we wanted very badly to come and speak to us about all sorts of humanistic issues underlying this conference, about the actual issue of gender-inclusive language, what happens when we take a step back from linguistics and start to consider the issue more person on person. This is someone who I admire very much. This is Wes Chernin, a speech-language pathologist joining us today, award-winning transgender speaker, consultant, educator. He partners with schools, healthcare clinics, businesses, communities in order to support queer and trans belonging. He has a very wonderful set of public communications. I got to know Wes from his Instagram, where he posts lots of helpful and uplifting things. And we are so excited to hear from him today. So I just gave a short bio, Wes. I'm sure we would love to hear more from your own mouth, and I turn everything over to you. Please, everyone, with an emoji or your hands, give a round of applause for Wes Chernin.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you, everyone who helped organize this, and thank you, everyone, for being here. Good morning to those of you who are tuning in from the West Coast like I am, and good afternoon, good evening to those of you all around the globe. I feel really, truly incredibly honored to be kicking off this conference today. There's such an amazing lineup and learning experience that is going to unfold over the next several hours, and you all get to spend the whole day diving into gender inclusive language instruction. And yeah, I just honestly can hardly believe that I get to kind of kick it all off. So as Ben said, my name is Wes. My pronouns are he, him, and I am a transgender speech language pathologist and DEI strategist. During our hour together, we're going to be elevating the why, unpacking the imperative of gender inclusive language, which is really just my fancy way of saying that we're going to be exploring the heart of gender inclusive language. We know it's important, or we wouldn't be here, but I want to tap into why it's important. Why are we having conversations about gender inclusive language in the first place? Why is this conference so crucial? I know that as the day unfolds, you're going to get to hear about some papers and studies and details about what gender inclusive language instruction means in various contexts and various languages, what it might look like in a variety of cultures and classrooms. And you'll get into lots of really, really valuable specifics. And my goal for this hour is to set the stage for why all of those specifics that you're going to be learning about later matter. I want to strip away some of the theory and academia, though there will be a little bit of that, but I really want to sink in to the human experience. So I want to start with just a little check-in. How are we feeling? What language is our body speaking today? How are we breathing? How are we sitting? I know that there's a lot going on right now in the world. I'm sure also in your personal lives and in your work lives. And today we're covering a really big topic. Some of you might be excited, some nervous, some curious. Like me, some of you might be trans or non-binary, and there might be a sense of vulnerability about the day. Some of you might be very well versed on this topic, while others might be exploring these concepts for the first time. And I really want to make space for all of that. So I want to take a few seconds just to ground myself in that intention. And I invite you to join me if you would like to find the sensation of your feet on the floor, or maybe it's just the way your body is on your seat, getting that physical contact. Put your hands just somewhere that feels comfortable for you. I'm going to put one of my hands on my stomach to help me notice my breath a little bit more. And I invite you to close your eyes if you so choose. And we'll do 3 breaths together, in through the nose and out through the mouth. Breathe in and out. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. One more. Thank you. There's something about that third breath for me personally. Every time I do it, it really lets me sink in a little bit, feel a little bit more grounded. So thank you for allowing, for sharing that practice with me today, allowing me to share that with you. I'm really excited to share space with each of you today as we enter into this conversation and tap into the why behind gender inclusive language instruction. I want to share some of my story with you. So I was assigned female at birth. When I was born, the doctors and my parents looked at my body and said I was a girl. They wrote female on my birth certificate, gave me a stereotypical girl's name, put me in dresses, surrounded me with pink, spoke to me with tenderness and care, told me I was sweet, and referred to me as she. As I grew up, I was taught that I was a girl, that bodies determine gender, and that gender determines the words that people use about us. My name and my pronouns were taught as static parts of myself, language set in stone from the moment I was born. And I was born in 1986, by the way. I'm a 90s kid. I was a teenager in the early 2000s. And I didn't really have any LGBTQ representation in my childhood, aside from seeing some trans women revealing themselves as trans to their boyfriends on shows like Jerry Springer. It was absolutely expected that the men on those shows would have a big problem with their girlfriend being trans. If they didn't, audience members looked very confused, they looked shocked, and they wondered what was wrong with both of them. Trans people were mocked in the media, they were thought to be freaks, and deeply, deeply misunderstood. Even though my transcestors have existed for centuries and trans people have been seen and honored and respected in some cultures for a very long time, all that I knew was what I had exposure to. And what I had exposure to was Jerry Springer. I felt pretty far removed from the drama that I saw unfold on TV. Trans people were the other. And how could I be the other when I am right here, myself? No one saw me as anything but a girl back then. I didn't even understand myself to be anything else. And yet, the neglect of gender inclusive language seeped directly into my life. I remember one time, probably in 7th grade, at Hebrew school, a boy classmate of mine pointed to my Airwalk sneakers and said, "Those are boys' shoes." To which I replied, "They're unisex," and was left with a beet red face and a sense of shame. I had loved those shoes. They made me feel great. They made me feel like myself. They were a solid form of expression. And because they were labeled unisex in the shoe store, I had thought that I was safe to wear them. But I guess I was wrong. Then there was that time in elementary school when I was at my friend's house and her mom expressed her outright disapproval to her child for being a tomboy. And I remember it so clearly. My friend, her mom, and I were all in their family van looking at and talking about a shirt catalog filled with all of these like really cool tie-dye graphic tees. You know, the ones with the animals and the tie-dye. Anyway, my friend's mom told her that she couldn't order the one that she wanted because it was a boy's shirt. And that was like absolutely a big no. She was very firm in her words and language and also in her tone and body language. Now, I felt kind of surprised and awkward in that moment because I was a tomboy too, and I wore shirts just like the one my friend wanted to get. So my friend protested to her mom, backing up her argument by pointing to me and saying that I wear shirts like that. Her mom said, well, yeah, but don't you have an older brother? They're just hand-me-downs. You, my daughter, cannot wear boys' clothes. Tension rose as we moved from the garage into their house, and I just remember wanting to be a turtle so I could crawl into my shell and hide. As we explore gender-inclusive language instruction, we cannot just be looking at the actual words being used. We need to also be talking about the implications and the impact that those words have on real people. That is what is at the heart of gender-inclusive language. It's the human impact. The impact of gender-inclusive language is great. It can result in gender joy and gender euphoria and a higher quality of life. Or when neglected or misused, it can result in suicidality and violence. It might sound like a big jump to some of you to state so confidently that language has life or death consequences, but I am sure that this audience, of all the audiences that I could be speaking to, understands better than most that the words we use are not just meaningless sounds put together to communicate. The words that we use reflect how we think. The words that we teach impact how others think. And the way people think determines their actions and behaviors. This is Nex Benedict. Nex was a Native American, non-binary, transmasculine high school student in Oklahoma. 2 months ago, they were tragically, brutally beaten in the bathroom at their school, and they died the next day. Nex had a history of being bullied by their peers for being trans non-binary. Now, I don't know all of the details of Nex's life or of the lives of the teen girls who beat him up, but what I do know is that their actions were a manifestation of transphobia, and I also know that their school rules and state laws use anti-trans, exclusionary, and discriminatory language that fueled and enabled these students to act in the way they did. I can only imagine how Nex's outcome may have been different had their school community adopted gender-inclusive language instruction. When gender-inclusive language pedagogy is neglected, instead of individuals and communities receiving this message that gender diversity is natural and beautiful, and that trans and non-binary people are valuable members of our society, they receive the message that transness and gender nonconformity is dangerous and abominable. They receive the message, much like I did in the 90s and early 2000s, that trans people are other and somehow less human. According to the Trevor Project 2023 US National Survey on the mental health of LGBTQ young people ages 13 to 24, 50% of transgender and non-binary young people seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year, with 20% reportedly attempting suicide. Trans people are not inherently more suicidal than the rest of the population. We see this massive uptick in suicidality and suicide because of how we are mistreated and stigmatized in society. Trans rights are being attacked across America right now. There are laws banning gender-affirming medical care, care that has been proven time and again to save lives. There are laws banning trans people from using the bathrooms that correspond with their gender identity. There are laws making it illegal for educators to use the correct name and pronouns for their trans and non-binary students. Laws restricting trans people from changing their name and their gender on their driver's licenses, and so much more. But here's what we know. We know that gender inclusive practices, including the use of gender inclusive language, saves lives and significantly improves quality of life. When trans people have access to affirming environments, the rate of suicidality significantly decreases. So if we can all consider trans and non-binary people in our language instruction, if you can consider our needs within the fabric of your teaching practices and language use, then you will undoubtedly be contributing to the cultivation of communities where people of all gender identities and gender expressions can thrive. I mean, all that trans means is that a person's gender identity is different from the one that we were assigned at birth. It's not a scary thing, right? But trans exclusionary language has invoked this fear and this mistrust in us, and it further ostracizes us and puts us in harm's way. The thing is, everyone has a gender identity. Each of us is assigned a gender at birth, and each of us has a gender or none that we know ourselves to be and identify with. For most people, the gender that they were assigned and the gender they identify with match up. But then for a lot of us, they don't. Gender identity is our deep knowing and internal sense of being a woman, man, neither, both, or another gender. A person's gender identity is not something that we can see by looking at their body or their clothes or their haircut. It's not something we can know by hearing their voice or reading their name. The reason why gender inclusive language practices have lagged is because for so long, we have been taught that we can just look at someone and know their words. We've been taught that everyone is either a boy or a girl, a man or a woman. But once this fallacy clicks, it becomes strikingly clear that gender inclusive language is the only way forward if we want to nourish the well-being of the people in our communities. I want to be clear about something. The language that we use isn't everything, right? I'm not trying to say that gender inclusive language instruction is like the sole magic ingredient that we need to rid our world of transphobia. If only it were that simple. But our language practices have power, a lot of power. They're a force of allyship. Language can help people feel a sense of belonging. And language is a precursor to other actions and behaviors. Language can be our key to cultural shifts that respect and value people of all gender identities and expressions. So let me be more specific about what I mean when I say gender inclusive language, because it might be different for different people. When I say gender inclusive language, I'm talking about language that affirms all experiences of gender, including transgender, non-binary, and cisgender. This is in contrast to traditionally gendered language, which only affirms binary gender identities like boy and girl or man and woman. And it also assumes that each person with that binary gender is cisgender. For anyone who's unfamiliar, cisgender refers to someone whose gender identity is the same as the one that they were assigned at birth. So this whole day, this whole conference is about the exploration of language that makes room for all genders to exist and thrive. That is what gender inclusive language is about. People of all genders being able to exist, to thrive, to be thought of and included, and to experience gender affirmation in their daily lives. It's a way of communicating that nourishes a sense of belonging. From my point of view, there are three key elements to gender inclusive language: gender neutral language, gender affirming language, and what I am calling gender possible language. Now, I think the most common way people think about gender inclusive language today is gender neutral language. But gender neutral language is only one part of gender inclusive language. Gender inclusive language is not synonymous with gender neutral language because gender inclusivity is not gender neutrality. Gender inclusive language is not at all about dismissing or erasing gender. It's about affirming all experiences of gender and reducing harm. So with gender neutral language, we're talking about words that lack gender specificity, therefore becoming words that encompass and include all genders. This includes practices like defaulting to using singular they instead of he or she, using child instead of boy or girl, parent instead of mom or dad, sibling instead of brother or sister, and so on. This type of gender inclusivity is very important. It provides us with a set of words to use when we don't know an individual or a group's most affirming words. It allows for us to avoid gender assumptions and therefore reduce harm. But gender neutral language does not capture all of what is needed in order to make language truly gender inclusive. Because the avoidance of gender specific words, such as in the use of gender neutral language, it can come with a risk of dismissing or ignoring someone's gender, which is going to have the opposite impact from the one we actually want. That's why we also need gender affirming language, the words we use once we know someone's affirming words. Gender affirming language is person specific, and it includes words that are free from gender and also words that are gender specific. We need all of it. Sometimes the way to be gender affirming is to use similar words to the ones that we would use when we're using gender neutral language. But this time we're using those words, not because we don't know the person's affirming words, but because their affirming words are they, them, or parent, or sibling. Gender specific words are not affirming to them, so we use the words that are. Then there are other times when gender specific words are actually the most affirming and appropriate ones to use. Gender specific language is what we're most used to using. And the words themselves don't need to be minimized. They're not wrong, they're not bad, we don't need to avoid them. We just should be reserving those gender specific words to affirm who someone is once they have let us know. If we don't know what words are most affirming to a person or to an entire group of people, we need to avoid assumptions and use those gender neutral, those all-encompassing words because they include everyone. Now, I really want everyone to recognize that we all need gender affirming language used about us. Whether we're transgender, cisgender, or another gender, we all need gender affirming language used about us. Most cisgender people have their gender affirmed all of the time, usually without noticing. That's because the cisgender experience is woven into the fabric of our systems, our laws, and our language. When it comes to gender and the way that our society is currently set up, cisgender resides in the center, holding power and privilege that is out of reach for transgender, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people. And it is not to the fault of any individual cis person, but it is our reality. And it's important to understand this power dynamic and inequity as we move towards adopting gender-inclusive language pedagogy. Trans and non-binary people do not need gender-affirming language more than cisgender people. It's just that most cisgender people automatically have it built into the language that surrounds them all the time. It is a privilege to never have the wrong gendered words used about you or assumed about you. It is a privilege to always have the right gendered words assumed and used about you. When you have this experience day in and day out, you might not even know the positive impact that it has on your mental health and quality of life. But it absolutely does. And we know this because of the experiences of trans and non-binary folks who don't have this privilege. We know this because when trans and non-binary individuals do get access to gender-affirming language environments, we see quality of life and mental health significantly increase. Okay, let's talk about this third and last piece, what I'm calling gender possible language. This is not a widely used term, but the sentiment is widely agreed upon. This is the vocabulary that we use that provides representation, teaches possibility, and honors gender diversity. These might be culture-specific terms and concepts that open minds and worlds or help people see themselves. Without this type of gender-inclusive language, it is much more difficult for trans and non-binary folks to see themselves and know themselves. Growing up, for me, I was only surrounded by gender binary language. And as a result, I dissociated, neglected, and suppressed my true relationship to my gender identity until my mid-20s, when I finally gained access to the normalization of LGBTQ concepts and terminology and the stories. I got access to the stories of other people who I could relate to using new terminology and new language and new words that helped me understand myself better. There aren't just two ways to be. This idea of the gender binary, that there are only boys and girls, only men and women, isn't accurate. So we need to shift our language instruction to reflect that. We need all three types of this gender inclusive language instruction in order for us to see the biggest positive impact. Now, I want to explore for a little bit why neglecting to use gender inclusive language does not only hurt trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people, but it actually hurts everyone, including cis folks. When we talk about gender inclusive language pedagogy, we are not talking about a separate set of rules for trans and non-binary communication. We are talking about a shift in the way that we recognize, acknowledge, and honor gender diversity for all of us. The thing about gender diversity is that it's not only trans and non-binary people that make up a gender diverse population. Our population in its entirety is gender diverse. Gender diversity reflects all of the different and diverse ways that people experience gender in this world. There aren't just two. So all of us together make up this gender diversity. I want you to think about racial diversity for a second. If 100% of the people in a group are Black, that group is not racially diverse. Racial diversity is when multiple races are present within a group. And the same is true for gender diversity. Most people do not fit squarely into a gender box, naturally and neatly staying within the confines of gender stereotypes. Some people do, absolutely, sure, but most people have some natural inclinations that stray from what has been prescribed to them as acceptable and allowable for their gender. That doesn't mean everyone is non-binary or trans. It just means that to be a woman can look and feel a million different ways, and so is true for every gender. Think about yourself as a kid, as a teen, as an adult. What have you learned about what is acceptable or unacceptable for you and people of your gender? I'm thinking about things like the colors we're allowed to like, the haircuts we're allowed to get, the clothes we can wear, the toys we like, the toys we can play with, the activities we can enjoy doing, the emotions that we can express. There are so many limitations. Now, I want to share a really short video clip with you about what happens to us as a society when we change ourselves to fit into these limiting ideas of who we're allowed to be based on our gender. It's taking a second to load.
Ritualized human beings becoming sculptures. We're told that we have to be smooth, that any perforation on our body is an embarrassment. We're told that we have to remove our body hair. We're told that we have to remove our personalities. And on the other side, we become smooth surfaces. But smooth surfaces together can't make the friction to propel a society forward. Give me the rough edges. Give me the incongruity. Give me the dissonance. That's where the beauty of humanity lives, the ways in which we're different.
We need to be embracing and celebrating gender diversity, and we need to be using language that matches the reality that we as a population are gender diverse. Let's allow ourselves and let's allow each other to have those rough edges so that we can propel forward. At the beginning of Alok's book, Femme in Public, they ask this question. What feminine part of yourself did you have to destroy in order to survive in this world? Answer, I'm trying to figure it out. Without gender-inclusive language instruction, we perpetuate rigid rules, gender roles, and harmful gender stereotypes and expectations on everyone. This means that we all internalize that there are right and wrong ways to be a woman or a man, and that those are the only options, and it's based off of what we're assigned when we're born. This truly, genuinely hurts all of us. And I have another short clip to share with you.
There's a multi-century PR campaign to convince the public that gender non-conforming people are dangerous, that we're delinquent, that we're disorderly, that we're fundamentally wrong. And this isn't just about gender non-conforming people, it's about everyone. Everyone's told and made to believe that they'll be punished if they stray away from these stringent ideas of what it means to be a man or woman. What that looks like is women who don't remove their body hair know that they'll be punished and judged. Men who express emotions know that they'll be punished and judged, and so they don't. And so then what ends up happening is that those of us who have the audacity to practice autonomy, to say, I get to exist outside of what your norms of who I should be, we experience the brunt of the violence, and we also experience the brunt of the awareness to teach society that it too is suffering.
think unraveling that suffering requires us really to re-examine the language and thought processes that we've been inundated with about gender. Gender does not need to be limiting. We can all feel empowered and proud and joyful in our gender experience. And implementing gender inclusive language instruction is going to open us and the people around us, going to open up that access point to allow us to do that unraveling. Now, affirming someone's gender through the language we use has been shown time and time again to significantly increase quality of life. Research proves this. Some studies have even suggested that when a trans or non-binary person's pronouns are used by everyone in their life, the risk of suicidality cuts in half. That is huge. There was one study even showing that having one important adult in a trans or non-binary youth's life using affirming language for them significantly decreased risk of suicide. There's also research out there showing that one adult is not enough. But I really want to spend a little time with this concept of gender joy with you. I want to dive into this. It's also called gender euphoria. It's this sense of joy or deep satisfaction that a person experiences when there is congruence between their internal sense of gender and the way that their gender is embodied, expressed, or perceived. It's really an emotional experience that we access as a result of feeling affirmed in our gender. And lots of things can elicit this. And anyone of any gender can experience gender joy. Oftentimes, it's more apparent to trans and non-binary folks because we know so intimately what it's like to not have our gender affirmed and to feel stifled and confined in a body or a set of rules that feel incongruent with who we are. But it can be felt in so many ways. It can be felt by the words people use about us, our name, our pronouns, other gendered terminology. It can be felt through feelings of embodiment and rightness in our clothes, in our hair, in the shape of our body. It can come from the sound of our voice. There are so many ways that gender joy can show up. Gender joy is really it's where it's at. It's so amazing, and I don't believe that it's talked about enough, though I am seeing more and more and more people talking about it. It's why it's one of the biggest reasons why trans rights matter. We don't just want to be tolerated in society. We want to experience the joy of being alive. We want to grow old. And these things are hard to do without access to gender affirming experiences. I have one more short video clip to share with you of some folks describing what gender euphoria means to them.
Gender euphoria is like...
It looks like this. You look in the mirror and you're like, hey, nailed it. There's no way to describe it to someone that doesn't experience it because it's just such a unique, such a personal experience as well. Like everyone experiences it differently.
Gender euphoria is much more of a thing for a lot of people where they get called accidentally or on purpose sir or ma'am, maybe at a shop, and feel happy about it in a way that they didn't expect or feel that they would.
Gender euphoria just feels like relief. It just feels really light. Just really small things. William, they, them, like using my pronouns. Like immediately like, oh my God, you see me. Thank you. It's just immediate joy.
It really is quite magical and amazing how much joy people can experience from the language that is used to and about them. I feel like these people in this video really help capture what we're getting at here, which is that gender inclusive language means access to gender joy and an equitable opportunity to thrive. For cis folks here today, I wonder if you can think about now or later today or this weekend, any ways that your gender is affirmed on a daily basis that you might not have thought about before. If something immediately comes to mind, you can share with the group in the chat if you want, but also just something to reflect on. It's not special treatment to implement language practices that affirm trans and non-binary people. So far, much of our go-to language only affirms and validates cisgender identities. But we all need that affirmation and validation. When someone's gender is affirmed through something as seemingly simple as pronouns, mental health increases, a cognitive load is lifted, and the ability to show up more fully in our work and social life increases. It's really such a powerful, beautiful thing. Now, I want to share some of my gender joy with you. My biggest experiences of gender joy relate to my body. For me, I think the gender possible language was the type of gender inclusive language I needed access to the most. I needed to hear people talk about their different experiences with gender. I needed to gain access to language that gave vocabulary to my desires and feelings. And I was able to gain access to gender inclusive language initially through the queer and trans community. And once I got that access, then I was able to experience gender joy and gender euphoria. My first real memory of tapping into gender euphoria as an adult was when I was 24 years old. And I put a binder on for the first time. And for those of you unfamiliar, a binder is essentially an undergarment that some folks who were assigned female at birth and went through puberty wear if they feel like they need a flat chest. So I knew that these things existed, and I knew that I did not, that part of my body was not right, but I didn't really understand what all of that meant in terms of my gender. And it can mean something different for everyone, but I knew I wanted to try on a binder. So I had waited. I knew I wanted this, and I knew I was going to be moving in like the next year to a new city. So I waited until I moved to that new city. I ordered a binder. As soon as I got it in the mail, I like ripped open that package. I put it on, and I put my t-shirt on over it and looked at my reflection in the mirror. And I mean, honestly, I didn't know that my brain had been doing so much work in overdrive trying to make sense of my reflection and my shape and my body. And all of the sudden, it was like the clouds cleared. It was incredible. Absolutely incredible. And I only had access to that experience because of gender inclusive language being introduced into my life. Another experience of gender joy that really stands out to me and very directly links back to the words people use is when a classmate of mine used my pronouns correctly. This was when I was doing my post-baccalaureate work for speech language pathology. And I was at the very beginning of my transition, and people were misgendering me all of the time. And I was in class. I didn't really know this classmate, but we were in this small group together doing an in-class assignment. And typical of me at that time, I was feeling kind of on edge. I was feeling very closed off. And it makes sense to me, given that back then I was usually surrounded by language that made me shut down. For example, being called ma'am when I'm going to order some food at a restaurant. So I came to expect it, and I removed myself from a lot of socializing as a result. I just wasn't feeling seen. But on this day, this random classmate of mine was talking to our other group members and referred to me as he. And I like came alive. I perked up. I felt like I could contribute again. I could be myself. I was seen. And it was such an incredible experience impacted by the language someone used. Lastly, I just want to share this photo with you because it captures one of my most gender euphoric moments. This was taken right after I went swimming for the first time post-top surgery. I really strongly encourage each of you to take some time later today or this weekend to reflect on how you might experience gender joy, especially if you are someone who hasn't thought about it before. But even if you are someone who knows it intimately, I have found that spending time with it can sometimes serve as almost a type of like gratitude journal or practice of self-love. So I want to thank each of you for giving me the space today to share some of my experience with you. And I just want to leave you with this. The why behind gender inclusive language instruction is really the human heartbeat. Thank you so much for being here with me and sharing this space.